It is Wednesday evening, so it is time for another episode of Weekend Reading. It's kind of weird that I do something about the weekend on Wednesday, but Wednesday is New Comic Book Day, and this is comic book related, and I read comic books on the weekend, so it makes sense to me. This week we are covering, as we do every week, talk about what I read last week, discuss what I'm going to be reading this week, and then I present either a question or I have now incorporated talking about an abandoned plot thread that that has come to mind as it did last week. And I'm going back to a question this week, but I'll explain. Let's just get back to it. First off, what we had last week was Reign of X Volume 3 and Radiant Black Volume 1, Not So Secret Origin. Reign of X was good, a lot of good stuff, especially the Wolverine parts were interesting, but it's an anthology series. It presents so many different things from so many different X-related books. It collects them all in one little convenient thing, so instead of buying a bunch of different trades, I'm just buying one, so that kind of makes it easier, at least in my opinion. But doesn't usually lend to being the favorite of the week. And it almost was, though, because what ended up being the favorite of the week was Radiant Black. And Radiant Black is an interesting comic book on a lot of levels, because there's all these blurbs about it, about how it seems so great and everything. And as I was reading it, I wasn't too sure about it, because it kind of seems like there's this. It seems like it just seems like it's covering things we've seen before that are so played out they're not that interesting. It's about a guy named Nathan who, he's a loser. He's very much down on his luck. He's a guy who left home thinking he had a talent and could make it as a writer, and he tried, but it didn't work out, and now he's horribly in debt, working shitty go-nowhere jobs, and now he's forced to go back to his hometown and move in with his parents and try to make something of his life. He's trying to set things right, try to get things back in gear, try to work, get out of debt, and also, pardon me, and also, try to get back into writing to actually make his dream come true, while trying to overcome his feelings of inadequacy. How is this a superhero book? Well, he's out partying with his boyhood friend. Oh, what the fuck was his name? I should have. That's something I should have. Good Lord. His best friend Marshall. While they're out drinking one night, they come across this weird thing that looks like almost a miniature black hole. And Nathan touches it and is all of a sudden transformed into a superhero. He has all these weird powers like flight and energy manipulation, maybe even some super strength, maybe. And he can also manipulate gravity, which is pretty cool. I just said his name. Marshall convinces him to try to become a superhero, and he even practices with his powers and stuff. And he thinks he's one of a kind, but he ends up coming across someone who looks a lot like him, except their coloring is red. Like his suit is black and white, and their coloring is black and red and white. And they seem to have slightly different powers from him, some similar ones, but instead of being able to manipulate gravity, they can sort of transmute and absorb matter to transform their costume into a more armored up look or something. And this person is robbing banks. This inevitably leads to a confrontation between. He starts calling himself Radiant Black, or his friend Marshall starts calling him Radiant Black. He even sets up a fucking Twitter profile for him. Meanwhile, he keeps trying to get back into writing, and he goes back to this short story about a woman who robbed the bank and is trying to reevaluate her life of how she got here and where she's going now that she's robbed the bank and her boyfriend is dead and all sorts of shit. That becomes a little bit more important later on. As I said, his initial confrontation with this red person who was like him leads to the red person coming after him. They fight, and in the fight, that's where this whole book changes. Because it just seems like it's a standard, almost like Spider-Man-esque story of just some loser trying to, get his life together while juggling being a superhero on top of it and finding himself through that. And then the whole thing changes up. Because in the fight with the red person, he ends up in a coma. The power that he has leaves him, goes to Marshall. Marshall, who doesn't want it, just wants his friend back, gets pissed, goes after the red person, determined to kill them, finds out it's some woman who was just, didn't like that she was being stopped from robbing banks and decided to go scare Nathan and didn't intend for things to get so out of control. And Marshall has every intention of killing her, and then surprise, surprise, two more people that look like them, also with different color schemes. One looked like yellow, the other like sort of a purple, pinkish. I don't know if there's actually a color for that, maybe like indigo or something like that, show up out of nowhere, and they warn that, whatever fight these two have going on, they need to put aside because they got a bigger problem. And Nathan was actually having these weird dreams that were like warning him that like something was coming, and Marshall saw similar things. And then next thing you know, some weird guy with swords shows up and attacks all of them. And it's just like, okay, this story is not what we thought it was going to be. You thought it was just going to be some standard sad boy superhero fare, and now it's becoming some weird sci-fi, almost Power Ranger-esque adventure. And it's just like, I'm way more interested in that than the sad boy shit, because I've seen that before. It's like, I can relate to that, but it's also kind of boring. So I'm way more interested in where this story is going at the end. And then the very last issue was a comic book about the woman who's the red person, and about why they're doing what they're doing, how they got caught up in a shitty situation with a really crappy fiance who got them into financial debt, and how she starts robbing banks to get herself out of this situation. And you can't help but notice that her story is oddly similar to the one that Nathan was writing about the woman who was the bank robber. So I couldn't help, I felt like, I don't know if I was reading into it too much, but I felt like that was an intentional, similarity. But yeah, Radiant Black, definitely the read of the week, and a series that I'm definitely going to be keeping an eye on going forwards. This was really, really good. What do we have this week? This week we have things a little different. I had to rearrange some things of what I initially had planned, like literally today, but I have my reasons for doing it, which I'll explain sometime down the road. So what we have this week is a new one, because it's not your standard superhero fare. It is Star Wars, The High Republic, There Is No Fear. I decided to go with some of these new Star Wars books based on this whole High Republic thing that they've been pushing lately. I'm interested. What can I say? A new era of Star Wars storytelling begins. Journey back to the High Republic, the golden age of the Jedi. Centuries before the Empire and the Skywalker saga, the Jedi are at their height, protecting the galaxy as Republic pioneers push out into new territories. But as the frontier prepares for the dedication of the majestic Starlight Beacon, the Padawan named Keeve Trennis faces the ultimate choice. Will she complete her Jedi trials or rescue the innocent from disaster? And can she trust her closest ally? Hutts, Rancors, Gamorreans, and far less familiar faces await in the tale of belonging and betrayal set in a rich and vast world of new Jedi. Prepare to experience new worlds, new ships, and new evils to fight, including the terrifying Nihil and a creeping alien horror. Collecting Star Wars, The High Republic 1 through 5 by Kavan Scott, Ario Anindito, Mark Morales, and Annalisa Leone. So, I like Star Wars shit. And I'm not a super Star Wars fan, but I like it. So I figured I'd give this a shot. It's something new. And then going back to standard superhero fare, we have Venom, Volume 6, King in Black. So I think this might actually be the last trade of this, but I'm not sure about that. Donny Cates and Ryan Stegman bring their 3-year saga to a stunning close. See, there I go, I was right. The horrifying threat of the King in Black, all-powerful god of the symbiote race, has loomed for years. Now, after millennia of imprisonment, Null and his symbiote army have arrived on Earth. But what is Null's hideous agenda? And what happens to Venom when he finally comes to face-to-face with the Lord of the Abyss? Eddie Brock is about to face the biggest challenge of his life, but he's not alone. Who will stand by his side in Earth's darkest hour? And do any of them have the slightest chance of success? Nothing will ever be the same for the Lethal Protector. Collecting Venom 31 through 35 by Donny Cates, Philip Kennedy, Johnson, Chris Giarrusso, Ibn Coelho, Ryan Stegman, Steph Walker, Danilo S. Beyruth, Ron Lim, Giulio Villanova, Gerardo Sandoval, Mark Bagley, J.P. Mayer, Jay Leistein, Scott Hanna, Victor Nava, John Dell, Frank Martin, Chris O'Halloran, Jim Campbell, Matt Mila, Alex Sinclair, Chris Sotomayor, and Richard Eisenoff. That is a lot of fucking artists. So this book is going to change its looks a lot as it goes, I bet. But yeah, this is basically closing up the Venom story. I mean, we've already read The King in Black, so we know basically how it ends, but it'll be interesting to see where things go from here. Now, last week I did something different where I did a sort of a thing called Abandoned Plot. I want to try to create new things to talk about instead of just a question. But I'm going back to a question this week because the Abandoned Plot thing was something I should have raised a question about beforehand. So, this is the question of the week. The question of the week this week is, like I said, related to what I talked about last week about abandoned plots. So I'll just get to it quickly. What is the best, in your opinion, what is the best abandoned plot, or a best plot line or storyline, or even plot thread, or maybe even comic book that was just abandoned? And I want to expand on abandoned, because sometimes you can have plot threads that are brought up or suggested and they just disappear. They're just never brought up again. Sometimes things can become a major, like it can be one of three things. Sometimes, like what I talked about last week with Xbox, it can be a major plot thread that's built up through several books, and then obviously it just never catches on the way they wanted, so they just decided to abandon it. Sometimes it could just be that you see something's building towards something. They're just building up slightly towards something, and then it never comes to fruition. Maybe the writer who was building towards it leaves or something, or maybe they just decided to reject whatever the idea was, and they waited until certain plot threads were being, built up to do it. So you're just like, what? There's certainly a thing in mind that I can think about, but I don't want to mention it here because I'm going to mention it in one of my abandoned plot things later on. But I also feel like it can be for like entire ideas that were being built up, and you could tell they wanted them to be something. And even though they were technically brought to a close, you can tell that wasn't what they wanted it to be. And I can think of another prime example of that, but I'm also not going to mention it here. So it doesn't necessarily have to be something that was just built up and then abandoned. It could be something that was completely built up and then abandoned. It could be something that was suggested or being built to and abandoned. Or it could be something that was built up because you knew it was something that the publishers wanted to be a thing. It didn't catch on the way they thought, and then they had to bring it to some sort of half-ass lackluster close, which may not technically be abandoned, but I still feel as an abandonment in a way. That's just the way I see it. So yeah, what storyline or plot thread or even maybe a whole-on comic book do you feel, or comic book character, do you feel was built up in one of those ways and then was just abandoned or brought to a very half-assed lackluster close? Because this is something that I'll be talking about further with my abandoned plots thing. So I want to throw it out there as a question first, as I should have done last week, but I got way too excited about the idea in my head and then fucking just ran with it. So yeah, that's the question. What is in your opinion the best plot thread that was built up and then just abandoned for whatever reason? So yeah, that is maybe not the most exciting episode of Weekend Reading, but I'm sorry, but I'm kind of in a hurry. So yeah, that's Weekend Reading for this week. Enjoy your weekend and enjoy your reading. Have a good one, folks.